Good evening again. We are going live on Rick CONCOFF's Coffee House, and it's Monday night. And we're doing something a little bit different this time. So we're on Facebook Live. We're on Coffee House, Rick CONCOFF's Coffee House. And we are on a number of other sites. We are on YouTube. I'm going to just check right here and make sure we are on these other sites. Okay, there we go. Good. So, good evening. Tonight we're going to do something different. So, I am developing a one-man show. And it's called On the Street Where I Lived. And it's about growing up in West Los Angeles, in Culver City, on a little street called Kilmore Street. And each time I do a little section of this show, I'm going to tell a story. And the stories kind of unfold in a recent trip to my hometown of Culver City. I had a very rare experience. We made our way up Sawtell, past my grammar school, El Rincon, and made a soft right on Kilmore Street. We parked on the opposite side of the street from my house, just down the block, 7 or 8 houses. We got out of the car and walked over to the side of the street I lived on and made our way up the street. This is the walk I took every day to and from grammar school, and what seemed as a memory very long was not so long at all. I walked slowly 20 or 30 steps behind my wife and my stepdaughter. I gazed diligently from side to side of the street, viewing each house and returning it in my imagination to how it looked 50 years ago, including those who lived there. The houses mostly looked different but eerily familiar. Only one person was outside gardening and bringing the trash cans back. Names I hadn't thought of since then came flooding in. Mrs. Moyland, Mrs. Shrimplin, who babysat us when we were young and watched a TV pilot called Wagon Train, paid no attention to us. I can't believe I remembered almost everyone on the street, the Hermansons and their dog Teddy, who chased me home from school, the Moores, who were on the city council, the Fishers, the Whalens, Shirley hoteling our next door later, the neighbor, the Gordons, the Otts, the hotellings, the archetypal mean lady at the top of the street who chased us as we cut across her perfect lawn with our speedy bikes. We always wondered what she would have done if she would have caught us. Now the Escondidos, who still live there, and the Downings, who live across the street, those are the folks that are still there. There were the Parkers. There was Carol Merrill, who bore no resemblance to the TV Carol Merrill, and who sang loudly in an opera voice, calling her son, Dawn! The Cantors across the street, the dad was a raging alcoholic, the young professor's son, who I loved to chat with, the McCoys, who were Christian Science, and therefore their dad died of a cancerous tumor on his neck that had been put aside because of their religious beliefs. They were, in essence, praying it away. 3 kids left with a pretty eccentric mom who saved piles of newspaper and gasolines in her garage and was a hoarder. My first story is called The Mean Lady at the Top of the Street. And I hope that you guys are. Whoops. Here we go. I'm hoping that you guys can see me. The first story is called The Mean Lady at the Top of the Hill. Didn't everybody have one person on their street who was kind of mean and old and used to yell at children and not like children very much? Well, here's a story about her. We were about 8 or 9 years old, and every day we hurried home from school, threw off our school clothes, put on our play clothes, had an untoasted Pop-Tart because it would take too long to wait for the toaster. Actually, as a kid, I taste tested Pop-Tarts for Kellogg's before they were released in 1963. And I offered that they would taste good only if toasted, and the cinnamon was the best, although when toasted, it burned my tongue. Again, I guess they went with the idea, and we still have Pop-Tarts, and I take credit for or blame for my role. After the snack, we'd run outside, ride bikes, and run around playing cowboys and Old West. MGM Studios was just around the block and over the fence, and we would occasionally sneak in and use the sets. Our moms assumed we were well-behaved, well-bred, and instilled with the fear of God. We were curious, a bit adventuresome, and sometimes a little bit naughty. Compliance isn't very fun. There was a mean, scary lady at the top of the block with the perfect lawn and the automatic sprinklers, which was quite a deal then. She seemed nasty and angry and old. I think every one of us has one of those on their street. Her very existence, taunted us and ended up haunting us. It wasn't that we really wanted or needed to ride over her lawn as the sidewalk curved abruptly at the top of the block. We could have made it staying on the sidewalk perfectly. It was the utter rush and thrill we experienced when we approached the corner at high speed on our one-speed bicycles. She would come rushing, limping out of her screen door in an old faded terry cloth bathrobe, shouting and shaking her fist and chasing us several houses down the street. It was the anger in her eyes. So far, she had never caught anyone, and we shuddered to think about what she might do if she did. Maybe grab us off our bikes by the hair, drag us in her house and spank us. Maybe she would drag us down to our parents and have a word with them, which could possibly be worse than the hair grabbing. Our parents never knew, but they know now because my mom's listening. She never came to our house. She never came close to catching us. I had a fantasy that if she did, she'd come marching down to our house, dragging us by our hair. We were pretty sure that would be illegal, and our mom and dad would give her a verbal lashing and warn her never to come near our house again, threatening to call the cops or sue her. Fantasy shattered. That would never happen. Adults in those days tended to automatically and consistently side with each other, unlike today when parents are eager to be mama and papa bear and support their kids no matter what. Besides, what we were doing was illegal too. Being God-fearing kids, we feared most authority. Every once in a while, I felt a little sorry for Mrs. Ferret. I think that was her name, but I think I've made it up because I didn't know her name. What must it feel like to be all alone, hated, feared, teased, baited, bullied, old, and constantly annoyed? I knew, because it happened to me at school every day. My red hair, sports shirt buttoned to the top, violin-carrying, Jewish, smartest kid in the class, timid, pants pulled up too high, was enough to entice even the nicest of bullies. And we know that behind every bully stands another bully. So why did we keep doing it? It was the dare of the block. Why? I remember. As you rounded the corner at magnum speed, pedaling madly and staring forward, briefly glancing at the front door, there was a what if. Sometimes she left her sprinklers on all afternoon to keep us off. What if the bike tire slid, throwing us off in her direction? What if the chain fell off the gear? The very remote possibility caused a tingling feeling in my feet, shooting up through my slightly tickling my knee and straight through my groin and stomach and into my throat. Kind of like an amplification of that feeling when you look down from the top of a skyscraper. Imagine jumping, knowing you won't, but fearing that you could and feeling your stomach fall 30 floors down. Almost hit the pavement, only to bounce back up into place. I didn't do it to hurt her or torment her or be mean or difficult. I did it for the visceral rush I got each and every time from the what if feeling moment, not for any other reason. That's why we kids did it. We continued to drill, becoming bored of it and moving on. Periodically, we'd step back into that cruel little trick. The last few times we did it, we were successful, and in fact, she didn't even come out. We guess either she had decided to ignore us, become nice, or maybe just given up. Not a stir from her. So we gave up too. We were getting too old for that behavior anyway. So the house sat motionless for a few months, then was painted, lawn replaced with landscaping, and then the Escondidos moved in. We never knew what happened to the old lady at the top of the street. Did we torment her to death? Or did she actually really ever die? And what was her name? We never actually knew her real name. Was she in some lonely nursing home due to all the stress that we caused her? In any case, I felt guilty, sorry, and remorseful. And I never behaved that way again. I continued to get bullied until, well, that's for another story. The next story is a very poignant one and a very prophetic one. Before I tell the story, I want to say that I've moved away from using the word bully and victim and perpetrator because bully, calling someone a bully is name calling. So I've moved it into a different realm. I've moved it into a realm of initiator, recipient, witness, and authority. And I'll tell you how that works. So an initiator is someone who does something to irritate or annoy someone, just basically for the joy of irritating and annoying them, or putting them down, or being in a power position. Well, that's an initiator. A recipient is someone who receives the actions of the initiator. A witness is someone who sees it happening. An authority is someone you go to tell it to stop. So when you ask the average crowd of people, how many of you have ever been an initiator? Every hand goes up. And if you ask how many have ever been a recipient, every hand goes up. If you ask how many have ever been a witness and seen something like that happen, every hand goes up. And if you ask most people, they would say at some point, someone came to them and asked them to please protect them and make it stop. So we've all been in all the roles. And that takes care of having to call someone a bully, which is name calling. Anyway, the second story is a story that I think relates to the story I just read. Now, this story did not happen on my street. It happened on the way to my street. Let me describe Kilmore Street. So Culver City is a little suburb in West Los Angeles. It's got a number of grammar schools. It's got one junior high, one senior high. It's got a Catholic high school, I think. It has a really shishi downtown now, but it used to be a really kind of corny downtown. A downtown where a lot of studio work, Desilu and MGM was done. A lot of famous people, Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, have Buster Keaton have had their pictures taken right there in Culver City. And to this day, I think Culver City still has a Sony studio there for filming. Anyway, so you had Overland Avenue, and it's a street that kind of goes all the way through town. And as you came to several streets, you would come to a stop sign, and you would make a right turn to go up, or a left turn to go up Kilmore Street, which had about 25 houses on it, all different. And if you made a soft left, you would go up Ranch Road into where the rich people lived. So we were the middle class, and the rich people lived up on the hill. But we used to climb up on the hill anytime. Anyway, so Culver City Junior High School was over on Alenda, which is another little section of Culver City that anybody from there would know. And I went to that junior high school, and I want to tell you, junior high school was 7 through 9, and high school was 10 through 12. And I'll tell you what I think about that. I don't understand why we ever started on middle schools, except it probably was financial reasons and logistical reasons. But if you think about it, 6th grade's kind of too young to be in middle school, and 9th grade is kind of too young to be in high school. And 9th grade is such a hard year. And what we do is in 8th grade, at the end of middle school these days, we break up the tribe and we send them all off to different schools. Whereas I went to ninth to junior high, so seventh, eighth, and ninth, and then 10th, 11th, 12th. You weren't prematurely sticking the sixth graders into an adolescent environment, and you were letting the ninth graders be on the top instead of the bottom. So I kind of like that. I don't know if anybody knows why we ever went to middle schools, but I think that we could second think that. Anyway, the scene is Culver City Junior High School. I think it was, I don't know, room 10, Mrs. Balla, but then she got married, so her name was Mrs. Harrington's English class. It was 3:05. I was in junior high school, and the last 10 minutes of my main class seemed like the clock was running backwards. I played a game with the time. I could only look at the clock once every 5 minutes. Finally, I played a game with the clock. I could only look at the clock every 5 minutes. Finally, after an eternity of seconds, the bell rang. I got up, gathered my stuff, and headed straight for my locker. As I walked down Hall A, with my bright orange hair sticking straight up from the failure of the previously applied dippity-doo hair gel, my frizzy, curly, copper red hair would start the day neatly parted with a wave, but by noon it had gradually crept up on one side, I resembled kind of Gumby in my head. A voice yelled from down the hall, "Hey, CONCOFF, what happened to your hair?" Everyone in the hall laughed. I hustled towards my locker, but the tall, popular kid beat me there, opening his locker, which was right next to mine, slamming it open in my face, as he often did. I grabbed my stuff and off I went. When you're the antithesis of cool, red, curly-headed, button shirt to the top, freckles, smart, and carrying a violin, you're supposed to be socially compliant, which means not being seen or sticking out. You're supposed to blend into the pale beige walls to be invisible. I wasn't aware of this code. So I was the violator by virtue of making myself seeable. I walked hurriedly to the bike rack, where many bikes were locked and tethered, like tethered horses waiting to take off. I took off the lock. I strapped my violin carefully onto the bike rack, so it looked kind of like a very long exhaust pipe. I dropped my things into the basket and took off over the white footbridge over La Bayona Creek, stiffly gelled hair not blowing in the wind. I hated heat in classrooms. I hated heat outside. The classrooms were hot and stuffy with no moving air. By the way, on the last day of school each year, as we crossed the bridge for the last time, we would ceremoniously open up our binders, rip out all the pages, and throw them over the barbed wire rails meant to prevent us from diving into the mostly waterless creek, which we would never dive into in the first place. I loved my bike. I polished the spokes and the frame weekly to demonstrate my regard for the bike. When I went home from school, I would often walk my bike to the top of the hill and ride down as fast as I could. I polished the spokes, the frame, and weekly to demonstrate my regard for the bike. I could go exceptionally fast. Sometimes I had to go fast. When I reached the intersection of Jefferson and Hazleton, which we called Fear Street, I had to put the pedal to the pedal as fast as I could. A couple of guys, we knew them as hoods, would hide out and wait for me to come and then jump out and chase me across the boulevard. I usually won as I was on my bike and they were on their feet, their laughter and taunts diminishing as I sped off and made a nice left up the street that led to Kelmore. One particular day, I hung out at school for a while, so hopefully they would not wait for me. Finally, I headed home. I hit the cross street before Jefferson Boulevard with zeal and determination, ready to get to safety, and I revved up my legs, ready to go and get across that intersection. To my surprise, the tall, blonde one named Gary bounded out from behind a palm tree and took off after me as fast as he could. I rode faster towards the boulevard, and he was right on my tail. The light turned yellow, and before I got off the curb, it was turning red and cars were revving up. I went anyway, and so did he. A car sailed through in front of me, and I had to stop. As the car passed, I sped up to the curb, but it was too late. He tackled me on my bike and threw me down on the ground. I reached and held onto my violin for dear life, even at the risk of falling off my bike, which I did. Gary tugged on it, snapped the bungee which held it on, snapped it at me as a matter of fact, and my violin landed hard on the ground, popped open, and the violin popped out. It hit the ground sharply, and the fingerboard slid off the violin, and the violin cracked in several places. Carly nearly missed it. It was actually just a 1902 Sears catalog violin, originally costing $2.50 in, I think, 1902, and having only slightly appreciated by this time. I'd only recently graduated from having my parents stuff towels under my door when I practiced, so it was actually becoming quite good. I worked with that violin, and I played it, and I exceeded it, and I really needed a better one, which I didn't get till I was 22. With violins, you have to get better than the violin, and then you need a new violin. But I mastered that violin early on, and I played it out, played everything I could on it until finally I was able to get my first real handmade violin, which was a 1876 Daniels that I paid $100 a month for after I moved up to Northern California for quite a while. Anyway, back to the story. I was sprawled on the ground and skinned and scratched palms. There was my violin, broken and scraped up. Traffic was stopped for a moment, but being Southern California, especially LA, no one really stopped to see what was happening, but rather they honked, shouted out the window, and then sped around my little disaster. Holding back my tears, I bravely looked up at the tall, lanky boy with long, stringy blonde hair, unkempt blonde hair, and I courageously exclaimed, "Hey, one day I'll be a famous violinist and you'll be in jail." He laughed hysterically, spat on me, and took off. I gathered up the casualties. Sorry, I lost my place. I gathered up my casualties and got out of the crosswalk, and as the cars sped by and he proudly swaggered home, I muttered to myself, the weirdest part is that the girls all have crushes on him. Why not me? Why do the popular girls always like the bad boys? Is that pretty much still the case? The worse they are, the more the girls love them. I took that old broken fiddle home, and my dad glued it back together with white glue, which it turns out you are never supposed to use on a violin. And I played it all the way through and past college. Prophecy has a strange way of playing itself out. A few years later, I was playing my violin, which was now considered cool, in a band. I had recorded a pretty successful, sort of famous Jewish album with my music partner, Ron, and an amazing singer named Anne. Somehow, I'm sure money was a factor. We were asked if we would like to play a prison concert coordinated by this eccentric elderly rabbi who was a Holocaust survivor with a very thick German accent. We always chuckled when we saw him as we played in the bar mitzvah circuit, and particularly because he looked kind of like a Jewish Don Knotts. Lured by the chance of remuneration and general slight risk and curiosity, we accepted the gig. We drove out to the prison, Dual Vocational Institute. When we got there, we found out that one of the Charles Manson followers was our sound guy. His name was Clem. If any of you have read Helter Skelter, you know about Clem. Maximum security, rows of concrete cells, blocks, everyone's imagination of a prison, and we walked right through them. Incarceration had always been one of my catastrophizing fantasy fears. Why did I feel a secret compassion for the inmates? We played the concert of Jewish Israeli folk music, smattered with a few wannabe fiddle songs, and Ron did a Johnny Cash imitation. Anne sang beautifully as the inmates yelled out, "Bend over, bend over." She considered it and she was okay because her sense of humor gave her a lot of leeway. We were fairly sure they were yelling at her, but I think in retrospect, they might have been yelling at Ron. Ron was known for his cute butt. The concert was stopped short because there was apparently a gang-related knife fight in the back of the audience. Yes, knives in prison, and they weren't plastic butter knives. A few who were in the front row and were clearly not in the melee came to the front of what was, fortunately for us, scared out of our bodies, a very tall stage. A tall, young, blonde man with stringy, upkempt hair, about 22, with a blue prison shirt, blue jeans, neatly his hair was long and stringy. It was a bit neatly combed, and he had a big smile. And he approached the stage, and he said, "CONCOFF, Ricky CONCOFF, is that you?" And I said, "Gary." And I said, last name. And I said, "Is that you?" And he said, "Yes." But he shushed me and softly saying, "That's not my real name anymore." Shh. "Hey, CONCOFF, what a trip." "Whoa, good to see you." He reached out to shake my hand. I nervously met him with a firm handshake. It felt great. He was actually proud of me. "What are you here for?" I curiously asked him. He replied, "Oh, just armed robbery this time." I paused, and for some reason I smiled. I guess that DVI prison wasn't a first offense kind of place. He seemed not to remember torturing me. I had compassion for him, but not pity. Pity is judgmental and a nasty gesture. He later apparently got out of prison and sadly overdosed and died. And so neither one of those situations left me particularly proud or happy, but kind of wistfully contemplative, because I had experienced the whole cycle of bullying, from being an initiator with the woman at the top of the hill who didn't really deserve our taunting, albeit I was young. I think I don't know if I was 8 or 9, but I was young. And then the torture that I experienced in middle school. And by the way, Gary wasn't the only one that hassled me. And I remember all their names. There was John, and there was a kid named Billy that wasn't my brother Billy, but another Billy. And there was a kid named Daryl, and there was a kid named, what was his name? Actually, I'm going to tell one more story, and this one I'm going to tell without a script. So I was in PE, and there was a guy there, and his name, you know those kids that don't have a first name? All I remember is his name was Sandusky. Does that sound like a good name for a tough guy? So I would be in PE, and one of the things that he and his cohort would do, we had these numbers that we had to line up on, and they would loogie on the numbers. You know what loogie is? Loogie is when you kind of and you spit. It was disgusting. And then I couldn't sit on my number when the coach came out. And one day he loogied on my locker, and the teachers weren't going to help at all. The coaches. As a matter of fact, there was this one coach who used to walk around and pull the back of our jockstrap and snap it really hard and say, "Don't be such a dumb bunny." So, that was about as much attention as we got from the coaches. Anyway, so Sandusky came over and he loogied on my locker, and then I bent over to wipe it off, and I dropped some money out of my pocket, and he grabbed it and wouldn't give it back. So we were outside, and I walked up to Sandusky, who, in my memory, I'm like 4 feet tall, and he's 12 feet tall, but I'm sure that wasn't the reality. And this is a true story. And I looked at him, and I just said, that was not cool. And I saw his big, gigantic fist come out like this. And he said, "What did you say?" I said, "That wasn't very nice." And as the fist is coming straight for my face, I look in front of me, and he is laying on the ground, writhing in pain. Did he have a heart attack? Did he have an appendicitis? What the hell happened? Well, what happened was there was a little guy in my PE class. His name was Jose Heredia. And he and his family, large Mexican family, rented an apartment from my grandma, who owned some apartment buildings on Washington Place. And apparently he knew karate or kung fu or something, because boy, he just came over and flipped that guy over. And that felt really good. It reminded me of that scene in The Karate Kid when the Pat Morita character beats up all the kids that beat up whatever his name is. I can't exactly remember. But anyway, that was a good day. And I went straight to my grandma and I said, Grandma, give them a rent decrease. Of course, she didn't, but I really thanked Jose, and that was an awesome moment. So I don't know, did that make me a better person? Did that build my character? Or is a little bit of it still with me? And every time someone of authority gives me a hard time, do I feel a little bit of that fear of getting harassed and bullied? There's another story, which I'll tell another time, which is was a remarkable story about how I dealt with this phenomenon. Actually, I'm going to tell it right now, and it's also not written down yet. It probably is written down somewhere. Anyway, I was in science class, and I was in 8th grade, and there was this kid, and he was short, and I remember he had these funny teeth with lots of space in between each tooth. His family definitely couldn't afford braces. And I think he was Jewish maybe, but he was in my face, and I had gotten new shoes. And he came right in my face and he went, "New shoes, Jew, new shoes, Jew." And I asked him to stop. And he said, "New shoes, Jew." And he kept saying, he was so close that I could feel the spray of his spit in my face. I said, "Please stop." And he said it one too many times. And I grabbed him by the shirt and I gave him the biggest push all the way across the room. And he went sliding across the room and fell into this tray or cart of beakers that then fell off and broke all over the place. He wasn't hurt, but he was certainly impacted. Anyway, my response was to start crying because I couldn't believe I did that. And the kids in the class were pretty stunned, and the teacher, his name was Mr. Bender, and Mr. Bender sent him to the office because he had seen the whole thing. Anyway, that was pretty cool. And I wondered if over the many years I embellished and or even dreamed up that story. And I had been playing gigs, weddings, and bar mitzvahs for about 20 years. And a woman came up to me at one of those gigs, one of the thousands of gigs I played, and said, "Hey, aren't you Ricky CONCOFF?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Well, we all wanted to thank you for throwing that kid across the room, because we girls really hated him." Anyway, that told me it really happened. Like, okay, it did really happen. After that, I did a very classic thing. I found a really big guy who was having a lot of trouble with his schoolwork, but wasn't having trouble being big. And so basically worked out a deal, and he was kind of my bodyguard. And he looked after me. He would question but never harm, but he would reprimand and admonish anybody who hassled me in exchange for helping him with his homework. So, and he's also a guy that had only one name. His last name was Henderson. So I don't know where he is, but he was a great guy. And I'm grateful to him for being my bodyguard. So those are just three of the stories of my childhood, and all having to do with me living there on Kelmore Street. I have one more thing I'd like to read to you before I sign off tonight, and that is a poem I wrote, and it is called "Whatever Happened to Play Clothes." I'm using this teleprompter app tonight, and it keeps speeding up, so it accounts for me getting a little bit lost. Adjust the camera a little bit. You love my, isn't that a beautiful view out the window? It's a beautiful day. Whatever happened to play clothes? You wear them and tear them and stain them for good. Whatever happened to playing outside as long as you could? When I was a child, I came home from school in my cords and button-down shirt. I couldn't wait to change my clothes so I could run and play in the dirt. Now I see kids when they come home from school, they can't wait to turn on the screen. It's so cool. They'd rather play Minecraft and surf while they study instead of going outside and finding a buddy. So when old clothes, once new clothes, are soiled and tattered, we send them to Goodwill as if play never mattered. Changing to play clothes, cookies and milk, nothing more was all that I needed to run out the front door. Teachers and parents wear old blue jeans these days, t-shirts of all sorts, while kids wear their pajamas or very short shorts, and t-shirts and flip-flops and any old thing, and wear earphones so loud we can hear their ears ring. Oh, there's Little League, Pop Warner, soccer, and such, but it's all organized and your parents are there and they care way, way too much. Whatever happened to play clothes? Red Rover, send Billy right over, searching the grass for just one four-leaf clover. Whatever happened to street play and freeze tag? Red light, green light, and capture the flag. The kids are now texting, their parents are Facebooking, it's taking over their minds while we aren't even looking. Whatever happened to play clothes? You put them on right after school. You went straight outside, staying indoors. Staying indoors was cool. Wasn't cool. Whatever happened to play clothes and fun? The dirtier you get them, the faster you'd run. You'd run and you'd jump and you'd slip and you'd slide, jump rope and hopscotch. You'd seek and you'd hide. Today's school clothes and play clothes are one and the same. Dash home from school, sign on to the games, clicking and gaming while you sit in your chair. If you ever get up, it's extremely rare. Hunting for the enemy with virtual maps while your parents are shopping and installing new apps. With our earbuds on a phone in our hand, we're always signed on with our heads in the sand. What's happened to play clothes is pathetic and sad. They serve as a memory of the fun we once had. We need to remember to run and to play and to put on our play clothes like back in the day. And what it was with play clothes, it was the ritual of the moment. It didn't have as much to do with the play clothes or the school clothes. It was a ritual of the moment that you had every day when you came home from school and you made that change and you shifted gears. And maybe we can get back to that. I think some kids that live in the country do that. We'll see what changes come about. So thank you for joining me. This was a different kind of a program. I hope you enjoyed the stories. And hey, I turned out all right. I found out I could defend myself. I developed a good sense of humor. I'm okay. So go ahead. It's after work. Go put on your play clothes. And we will see you next week. So long from Rick CONCOFF's Coffee House.